The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the Chicago streets into rivers of neon reflections. Marcus Chen stood under the flickering awning of Chen's corner market, watching the downpour with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too many storms, both literal and metaphorical. At 23, he'd already lived several lifetimes' worth of struggle, each one carved into the calluses on his hands and the premature lines around his eyes.
Another late night, huh?
Old Mr. Patterson called from inside the store, his arthritic fingers counting out the day's meager earnings. Marcus managed a tired smile. Always is, Mr. P. You need help closing up? Nah, you get on home, son. That college homework won't do itself.
College.
The word felt both like a dream and an anchor around Marcus's neck. By day, he attended classes at Chicago Community College on a partial scholarship. By night, he worked at the corner market. On weekends, he picked up construction gigs. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, but neither was ignorance. Education was his only way out of the poverty that had defined his entire existence. As Marcus stepped into the rain, his threadbare jacket immediately soaked through. He didn't have money for an umbrella, hadn't for years. He'd learned to accept discomfort as a constant companion, just like hunger, exhaustion, and the gnawing loneliness that came from having absolutely no one in the world who cared whether he lived or died. The foster system had spit him out at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a chip on his shoulder. 5 years later, he was still fighting, still surviving, still hoping that somewhere beyond the gray horizon of his circumstances, there was something better waiting. He was halfway to the bus stop when he saw it, a leather wallet lying in a puddle, rain drumming against its expensive surface. Marcus's first instinct was to keep walking. In his neighborhood, minding your own business was rule number 1. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the exhaustion clouding his judgment, or maybe it was the memory of the one time someone had helped him when he'd lost his only $10 to a hole in his pocket. Marcus bent down and picked up the wallet. It was heavy, designer, the kind of thing that cost more than he made in a month. Water dripped from the fine leather as he opened it, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside were at least 50 crisp $100 bills. $5,000. Maybe more. His hands trembled. This money could change everything. He could pay his tuition for the next semester. Buy a decent winter coat. Eat something other than ramen for once. Maybe even afford the medical textbooks he'd been photocopying page by page at the library because he couldn't afford to buy them. Marcus looked around. The street was empty, rain-curtained and dark. No one would know. He could just take it and walk away. $5,000 wouldn't even matter to someone who carried that kind of cash around. They probably had plenty more where that came from. But then he saw the driver's license in the clear pocket. The face staring back at him made his heart stop.
High cheekbones. Almond-shaped eyes.
A small mole just above the left eyebrow.
He knew that face.
It was older now, refined, framed by professionally styled hair instead of the messy ponytail he remembered. But those eyes had haunted his dreams for 15 years. Victoria Ashford née Chen. His mother. The wallet slipped from his numb fingers and hit the pavement with a wet slap. Marcus stumbled backward, his mind reeling, the rain suddenly feeling like ice against his skin.
Victoria Chen.
The woman who had abandoned him at a fire station when he was 8 years old, leaving nothing but a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." He'd spent years in foster care, moving from home to home, always wondering why. Why wasn't he good enough? What had he done wrong? Why had she thrown him away like garbage? And now, 15 years later, he was holding her wallet. Her name was Ashford now. She'd gotten married. Moved on. Built a new life while he'd struggled to survive in the ruins of the old one. Marcus bent down with shaking hands and picked up the wallet again. Behind the driver's license was a business card. Victoria Ashford, CEO, Ashford Enterprises. Luxury Real Estate Development.
CEO. She was a CEO.
While he'd been eating in soup kitchens and sleeping in shelters during his teenage years, she'd been building an empire. While he'd been fighting off bullies in foster homes, she'd been climbing corporate ladders. While he'd been utterly alone in the world, she'd been living a life of luxury. The rage that surged through Marcus was so intense it made him dizzy. He wanted to throw the wallet into the sewer. He wanted to take every dollar and burn it. He wanted to find her and scream at her, demand answers for why she destroyed his life. But he didn't do any of those things. Instead, Marcus pulled out his cracked phone and dialed the number on the business card. It rang 4 times before a smooth professional voice answered, a voice he would have recognized anywhere, even after all these years. Victoria Ashford speaking. Marcus couldn't breathe. His mouth opened, but no words came out.
Hello?
Is anyone there? I found your wallet, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper.
There was a pause. Oh, thank God.
I've been looking everywhere for it. Where are you? Corner of Madison and Pulaski. That's quite far from where I lost it. Listen, I'm in the middle of something, but I can send someone to pick it up. Or, better yet, could you bring it to my office tomorrow? I'd like to reward you properly for your honesty. There's quite a bit of cash in there. I know, Marcus said flatly.
Another pause.
I'll have my assistant send you the address.
What's your name? This was it.
The moment that would change everything.
He could tell her.
He could say, I'm Marcus Chen.
The son you abandoned.
The child you threw away. He could destroy whatever peace she'd found in her new life. But the words stuck in his throat. It's Marcus, he said finally. Just Marcus. Well, just Marcus, she said with a light laugh that made his chest ache. I really appreciate this. Most people wouldn't have bothered. Come by tomorrow at noon. Ashford Enterprises, top floor of the Millennium Tower. I promise it'll be worth your while.
She hung up before he could respond.
Marcus stood in the rain, staring at the wallet in his hands, his mother's face smiling up at him from the driver's license. She didn't recognize his name. She probably didn't even remember she'd ever had a son named Marcus. The realization should have hurt, but instead, it ignited something cold and calculating inside him.
She didn't know who he was.
Which meant he had the advantage. He could walk into her office, look her in the eye, and she wouldn't have a clue that she was facing the child she'd abandoned. The question was, what was he going to do with that power?
Marcus didn't sleep that night.
He sat in his tiny studio apartment, really just a converted storage room in a building that should have been condemned years ago, and stared at Victoria Ashford's business card until his eyes burned. At 5 a.m., he gave up on sleep entirely and started researching. The laptop he'd salvaged from a dumpster and painstakingly repaired word to life, and he began digging into everything he could find about Victoria Ashford. What he discovered made his blood boil. She was worth millions. Ashford Enterprises was one of the most successful luxury real estate development companies in Chicago, specializing in high-end condos and commercial properties. She'd married Trevor Ashford, heir to the Ashford fortune, 12 years ago. They had 2 children, Sophia, age 11, and Ethan, age 9. She had a family.
A real family.
The same woman who couldn't handle raising one son now had 2 children she apparently had no problem loving and caring for. The same woman who'd left him at a fire station like trash now lived in a Gold Coast mansion worth $20 million. Marcus clicked through photo after photo from society pages and business magazines. There she was at charity galas, smiling brilliantly in designer gowns. There she was cutting ribbons at building openings, powerful and confident. There she was with her perfect family, her handsome husband and beautiful children, everyone looking like they'd stepped out of a catalog for the American dream. She'd erased him.
Completely.
As if he'd never existed at all. The shocking secret. But then Marcus found something that made his hands freeze on the keyboard. It was an old article from the Chicago Tribune, dated 16 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman saves family from fire, suffers severe injuries." He clicked on it with trembling fingers. Victoria Chen, 28, is being hailed as a hero after saving her elderly neighbors from a residential fire in Bridgeport last night. Chen sustained second-degree burns to her arms and smoke inhalation while helping George and Martha Winters escape their burning apartment building. I just did what anyone would do, Chen said from her hospital bed. Chen, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her young son, has been forced to take unpaid leave while recovering. A GoFundMe page has been set up to help with medical expenses and lost wages. Marcus sat back, his mind racing.
The fire.
He remembered the fire. He'd been 7 years old, and he remembered his mother coming home with bandages all over her arms, remembered the way she'd cried in pain but still hugged him and told him everything would be okay. A year later, she'd left him at the fire station. He dug deeper, searching for more information about that period of their lives. What he found was a series of medical bills that had been uploaded to the GoFundMe page, and at the bottom, a note from Victoria, "Thank you all so much for your generosity. The medical costs have been overwhelming, but worse is that I've been unable to work. My son and I are facing eviction, and I don't know what to do. If you can help in any way, please know that you're saving our lives." Then, 3 months after that post, she'd abandoned him. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. For 15 years, he'd told himself that she'd left because he wasn't good enough, because she didn't love him, because she was selfish and cruel. But what if it had been something else? What if she'd been desperate, drowning, unable to see any other way out?
No.
He shook his head violently. That didn't excuse what she'd done. Nothing excused what she'd done. Even if she'd been struggling, you didn't throw away your child.
You fought. You survived. You found a way.
He'd had to fight his whole life without her.
Why hadn't she fought for him?
At 11:30 a.m., Marcus stood outside the Millennium Tower, her wallet heavy in the pocket of his only dress shirt, a thrift store find that was 2 sizes too big but clean and mostly unwrinkled. The building was a gleaming monument to wealth, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a middle finger to everyone who couldn't afford to enter. He'd almost talked himself out of coming a dozen times. But he needed to do this. He needed to look her in the eye and see if there was any recognition, any guilt, any hint that she remembered the son she'd left behind. The lobby was all marble and expensive art. The security guard looked at Marcus like he was something that had crawled in from the street, which technically he had. But when Marcus showed him Victoria Ashford's business card and explained he was expected, the guard's demeanor changed immediately.
Top floor, sir.
Mrs. Ashford is expecting you. The elevator ride felt like ascending to another planet. Each floor marked another stratum of wealth and privilege that Marcus had never experienced. By the time he reached the top, he felt like an alien in his own body. The receptionist, a polished woman with a smile that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, greeted him warmly. You must be Marcus. Mrs. Ashford will be right with you. Please have a seat. Marcus perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than 3 months of his rent. The office was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago. This was the world his mother inhabited now. A world so far removed from the cramped apartment they'd shared that it might as well be fiction.
Marcus. He looked up, and there she was.
Victoria Ashford in person was even more striking than her photos. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that screamed power and sophistication. Her hair was styled in a sleek bob, and diamond studs glinted at her ears. But it was her eyes that froze Marcus in place, the same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, the eyes he'd inherited from her. Thank you so much for coming, she said, extending her hand. Marcus stood and shook it, her grip firm and confident. I cannot tell you how relieved I am. That wallet has everything: credit cards, identification, cash. I was in a panic when I realized I'd lost it. It was in a puddle on Madison, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Must have fallen out of your purse or something. I was showing a property in that area yesterday, and it must have happened then. Honestly, I'm just grateful it fell into the hands of an honest person. In this city, that's rare. She gestured for him to follow her into her office, and Marcus walked into a space that was larger than the entire foster home where he'd spent his 14th and 15th years. Awards and photos lined the walls, her with politicians, celebrities, business moguls. All the trappings of success. None of the photos included a young boy with her eyes. So, Victoria said, settling behind her massive desk and opening a drawer, I promised you a reward for your honesty.
She pulled out a checkbook.
How does $500 sound? Would that be helpful? Marcus stared at her, this stranger who had once been his entire world. $500. She was offering him $500 for returning something that belonged to her in the first place. I don't want your money, he heard himself say.
Victoria looked up, surprised. No?
Then what can I do for you? There must be something. You took the time to come all the way here.
This was it. The moment. He could tell her right now.
He could watch her face crumble when she realized who he was. He could demand answers, demand an explanation for why she'd ruined his life. But as he looked at her, really looked at her, he saw something that gave him pause. There were faint scars on her hands, barely visible under the expensive manicure.
Burned scars.
And in her eyes, beneath all the confidence and success, there was something else.
Something haunted.
Actually, Marcus said slowly, an idea forming, I'm a college student. I'm studying business. I was wondering, could I maybe shadow you for a day? See what it's like to run a company like this? It would be more valuable than money for my education. The lie came easily, smoothly. He wasn't studying business, he was pre-med. But she didn't need to know that. Victoria's face lit up.
Oh.
Well, that's unusual, but I love the initiative.
You know what?
I could use someone with your integrity around here. How would you like an internship instead? Part-time, it would work around your class schedule. You'd get hands-on experience, and it pays $15 an hour. Marcus's heart raced. This was better than he could have imagined. A chance to infiltrate her life, to understand how she could move on so completely while he'd suffered. I'd like that very much, he said.
Wonderful.
Victoria stood and extended her hand again. "Welcome to Ashford Enterprises, Marcus. I have a feeling you're going to do great things here." As Marcus shook his mother's hand for the second time in 15 years, he felt the universe shift around him.
She didn't recognize him.
She had no idea that the honest young man she was praising had once been the child she'd abandoned in the night. But he would make sure she remembered. One way or another, Victoria Ashford was going to face what she'd done. He just hadn't decided yet whether he wanted justice or revenge. Marcus's first day at Ashford Enterprises began with a lie that tasted like bitter coffee on his tongue. He'd called in sick to his job at Chen's corner market, something he'd never done in 3 years, and rearranged his class schedule to accommodate the internship hours Victoria had offered. Mr. Patterson had been understanding, even concerned, but Marcus felt the weight of his deception like stones in his pockets. Now, standing in front of the Millennium Tower at 8 a.m. sharp, wearing the same thrift store shirt he'd worn 2 days ago, Marcus felt his resolve waver. What was he doing? What did he hope to accomplish by infiltrating his mother's life? The answer came swift and sharp: everything. "I want to understand everything." The receptionist, whose name he learned was Amanda, greeted him with a warm smile and a visitor's badge. "Mrs. Ashford is already here. She's always the first one in and the last to leave. That woman never stops. Let me take you back." As they walked through the sleek corridors of Ashford Enterprises, Marcus absorbed every detail. Employees bustled past with purposeful strides, their clothes expensive, their conversations peppered with industry jargon. This was a world built on money and ambition, and somewhere at the center of it all was the woman who had given birth to him in a county hospital 23 years ago. Victoria's office door was open, and she was on the phone, her voice crisp and commanding. "No, Richard, I don't care what the investors want. We're not cutting corners on the Riverside project. If they want luxury, they'll get luxury, and that means quality materials. End of discussion." She hung up and looked up, her expression softening when she saw Marcus.
"Ah, there you are. Right on time.
"I like that." She gestured to a smaller desk positioned near the window. "That's going to be your workstation when you're here. For today, though, I want you to shadow me. See what a typical day looks like." "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford. I really appreciate this opportunity."
"Please, call me Victoria."
"Mrs. Ashford makes me feel ancient." She smiled, and for a moment, Marcus saw a flash of the young woman from his childhood, the one who used to make him pancakes on Saturday mornings and sing old Chinese lullabies when he couldn't sleep. He crushed that memory immediately. That woman was gone, if she'd ever really existed at all. The morning passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and property assessments. Victoria was formidable in action, negotiating contracts with the precision of a surgeon, charming difficult clients with effortless grace, and managing her team with a firm but fair hand. Marcus watched it all with a mixture of admiration and resentment. This was the woman who couldn't handle being his mother? This powerhouse who commanded respect and built empires? The disconnect was staggering. During a brief lull, Victoria turned to him with genuine interest. "So, Marcus, tell me about yourself. What made you choose business as your major?" The question was a minefield. Marcus had prepared a cover story, but sitting across from her, seeing the attentive way she looked at him, made the lies harder to tell. "I grew up without much," he said carefully, which was true. "I saw how hard people worked just to survive. I wanted to understand how wealth is built, how some people succeed while others struggle. I guess I wanted to level the playing field somehow." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Pain? Recognition? It was gone before Marcus could identify it. "That's admirable," she said softly. "And rare. Most business students I meet are just chasing dollar signs. You're looking at the bigger picture." She paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. "I grew up without much too. I understand that hunger, that drive to be more than your circumstances." Marcus's hands clenched beneath the desk. "You left me to face those circumstances alone. How did you do it?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Go from poverty to all this?" Victoria's laugh was hollow. "That's a long story. And not a particularly pleasant one." She glanced at her watch. "Come on, I'm taking you to lunch. There's someone I want you to meet." The restaurant was the kind of place Marcus had only seen in movies: white tablecloths, waiters in crisp uniforms, and prices that made his stomach churn. Victoria moved through it like she belonged there, which she did. This was her world now. Waiting at a corner table was a man in his 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's entire year of tuition. He stood when they approached, embracing Victoria warmly. "Marcus, this is James Brennan. He's been my mentor since I first entered real estate. James, this is Marcus, my new intern." James's handshake was firm, assessing. "Victoria speaks highly of you already, young man. That's quite an achievement. She's notoriously difficult to impress." As they settled into their seats and ordered, Victoria ordering for Marcus when she noticed him hesitating over the menu, James and Victoria fell into easy conversation about properties and market trends. But Marcus noticed the way James looked at Victoria, the subtle protective edge to his tone whenever he addressed her. "How's Trevor?" James asked casually, but Marcus caught the undercurrent in the question. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Busy with his own projects. You know how it is." James's disapproval was clear. "And the children?"
"Wonderful.
Sophia made honor roll again, and Ethan is thriving in his new school." Victoria's voice warmed genuinely when she spoke of her children, and Marcus felt that familiar knife twist in his chest.
She loved them.
She was a good mother to them. So what had been wrong with him? The shocking revelation. "You know," James said, his eyes distant with memory, "I still remember when you first came to my office 17 years ago. You were so young, so desperate, but you had this fire in your eyes. I've never seen someone fight so hard to remake their life." Victoria's face paled.
"James."
"She literally had nothing," James continued, seemingly oblivious to Victoria's discomfort, but Marcus suspected he was testing something, watching for Marcus's reaction. "Fresh off the worst tragedy of her life, barely able to function, but she begged me for a job.
"Any job?"
I started her as a receptionist, and within 2 years she was my top agent." "What tragedy?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. The silence that fell over the table was deafening. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, and James looked between them with sudden realization that he'd said too much. Victoria's voice cracked.
"I lost someone. A long time ago."
"It's not something I talk about." "I'm sorry," James said quickly. "I shouldn't have brought it up. Old memories, you know how they sneak up on you." But Marcus's mind was racing. 17 years ago. That would have been right before she abandoned him. What tragedy? What had happened that James considered it the worst tragedy of her life? Victoria excused herself to the restroom, and the moment she was gone, James leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "You're wondering," he said bluntly. "I can see it in your eyes. You want to know what happened to her."
"I don't."
"She lost her son," James said quietly. "Or at least, that's what she believed for a very long time. The details are hers to share, not mine, but I'm telling you this because I see the way you watch her. Like you're trying to solve a puzzle. Victoria is one of the strongest people I know, but she's also one of the most broken. She's spent 17 years building walls so high that even the people who love her can't scale them." Marcus felt the world tilt. "What do you mean, she believed she lost her son?" James stood, dropping cash on the table. "That's her story to tell, son. But I'll say this, if you're going to work for her, you need to understand that woman has survived things that would destroy most people. Whatever you think you know about her, you're probably wrong." He left just as Victoria returned, her composure rebuilt but her eyes red-rimmed. She made an excuse about the spicy food, but Marcus knew she'd been crying. The rest of lunch was awkward, filled with stilted conversation about safe topics. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about James's words. She believed she lost her son. What did that mean? He'd been at a fire station, perfectly fine. She'd left him there by choice. Hadn't she? That evening, back in his apartment, Marcus pulled out every memory he had from that night 15 years ago. He'd been 8 years old, coming home from a friend's house. His mother had been waiting for him, her face streaked with tears. "Marcus, baby, I need you to be brave," she'd said, pulling him into her arms so tight he could barely breathe. "Something happened, something terrible, but I'm going to fix it. I promise I'm going to fix it."
"What happened, Mama?"
"I can't explain right now. But I need you to do exactly what I say, okay? We're going to go for a drive." She'd driven him to the fire station in the middle of the night. He remembered the neon lights, the way rain had started to fall, just like it had been raining when he found her wallet. She'd walked him to the door, crying so hard she could barely speak. "I love you so much," she'd whispered. "More than anything in this world. You have to remember that, no matter what happens. I love you." "Mama, you're scaring me." "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." She'd kissed his forehead, pressed a note into his hand, and then, she'd run. Just run away into the night, leaving him standing alone at the fire station door. The firefighters had found him minutes later, sobbing and clutching the note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore.
Please take care of him."
His name is Marcus Chen. For 15 years, Marcus had interpreted those words as rejection,
As abandonment.
as proof that he wasn't wanted. But what if he'd been wrong? James's words echoed in his mind. She believed she lost her son. Marcus opened his laptop and began searching with new parameters. Not for Victoria's success story, but for anything that happened in Chicago 17 years ago involving a woman named Victoria Chen and her son. It took 3 hours of digging through old newspaper archives and police reports before he found it. The headline made his blood run cold. Mother pleads for help finding abducted son, 8-year-old Marcus Chen missing after alleged kidnapping by child's father. Marcus's hands shook as he clicked on the article, dated 1 day after his mother had left him at the fire station. Victoria Chen, 29, is asking for the public's help in locating her 8-year-old son Marcus, who was allegedly taken by his biological father, David Wong, late last night. Wong, who has a history of domestic violence and has been estranged from the family for 6 years, reportedly broke into Chen's apartment and abducted the child while Chen was at work. "Please, if anyone has seen my son, call the police," Chen said through tears at a press conference this morning. "I just want him back. I can't lose him." Wong is considered dangerous and should not be approached. The article continued, but Marcus couldn't read anymore. His vision blurred, and he realized he was crying.
David Wong. His father.
The man his mother had always refused to talk about, the name that made her face close up whenever young Marcus had asked about him. He searched for more articles, finding a series that documented the case. Day 2, police search for missing boy continues. Day 5, Amber Alert issued for Marcus Chen. Day 10, mother of missing boy hospitalized after breakdown. Day 15, search for missing boy scales back, family prepares for worst.
And then, nothing.
The article stopped. There was no resolution, no follow-up story about a found child. Because that child, Marcus himself, had been at the fire station the entire time, processed into the foster system under his mother's name, Victoria Chen.
But somehow, she hadn't known.
Somehow, she'd believed her son was gone, taken by a dangerous man, possibly dead.
How? How had this happened?
Marcus dug deeper, pulling up foster care records he'd obtained years ago when he'd aged out of the system. He'd never looked at them carefully before, too painful a reminder of his abandonment. But now he read every word. The night he'd been left at the fire station, he'd been processed as an abandoned child. His mother's note had been taken as evidence. Standard procedure meant they should have tried to contact Victoria Chen, but Marcus's breath caught. The address listed in the system wasn't his mother's apartment. It was an address he didn't recognize, on the other side of the city. Someone had filed paperwork with the wrong address, and follow-up attempts to contact his mother would have failed. Letters would have been returned. Phone calls, if they'd even tried, would have gone to wrong numbers. By the time anyone realized the error, he'd already been in the system for weeks, his mother's note taken as legal proof of abandonment. And his mother, meanwhile, had believed her son was kidnapped, probably dead, taken by a violent man she'd spent years escaping. The devastating truth. Marcus found one final article, dated 6 months after that terrible night. Mother of missing boy attempts suicide, survivor says she couldn't live without her son. The article was brief, respectful of privacy, but it confirmed what Marcus had begun to suspect. His mother hadn't abandoned
him because she didn't love him.
She'd left him at that fire station thinking she was protecting him from his father, planning to come back for him once she'd contacted police, once she'd made sure he was safe. But David Wong must have found her. Must have made her believe he'd already taken Marcus. And in her grief and terror, she'd. Marcus closed his laptop, his entire worldview crumbling.
For 15 years, he'd hated her.
For 15 years, he'd believed himself unwanted, unloved, tossed away like trash. He'd built his entire identity around that abandonment, around being the child no one wanted. And it had all been a lie.
A mistake.
A tragic, horrible mistake that had destroyed both their lives.
His phone buzzed.
A text from Victoria, "Great work today, Marcus. I'm looking forward to having you on the team. See you tomorrow at 8 a.m. Marcus stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen.
She didn't know.
After all these years, she still didn't know that her son was alive, that he'd survived, that he'd been in foster care while she'd been building her empire and starting a new family.
He should tell her. Right now.
He should call her and explain everything, reunite them after 15 years of separation. But as Marcus looked around his tiny apartment, At the life he'd built from nothing, at the scars she'd never see and the pain she'd never understand, he realized something dark and terrible. He wanted her to suffer first.
She'd gotten to move on.
She'd gotten therapy, clearly, based on James's comments about her rebuilding her life. She'd gotten to heal, to marry, to have other children, to become successful and powerful. She'd gotten to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. Marcus had gotten none of that. He'd gotten foster homes and abuse and hunger and loneliness. He'd gotten to wonder every single day why he wasn't good enough to keep. Yes, it had been a mistake.
A tragic misunderstanding.
But she'd never looked for him in the system. She'd never checked foster care records. She'd given up, moved on, and left him behind.
So he would infiltrate her life.
He would make her care about him as Marcus the intern, Marcus the ambitious college student, Marcus the young man with integrity. He would make her invest in him, trust him, maybe even love him a little. And then, when she was fully attached, when she'd opened her heart to him without knowing who he was, he would reveal the truth. He would show her that the son she'd mourned had been alive all along, suffering, surviving, fighting, without her. He would make her feel the abandonment he'd felt.
It was cruel. It was twisted.
It was probably unforgivable. But Marcus had spent 15 years being the victim. Just once, he wanted to be the one in control. Tomorrow, he would go back to Ashford Enterprises. He would smile at his mother and call her Victoria. He would be the perfect intern, the model employee, the son she never knew she'd found. And eventually, he would break her heart the way his had been broken. The rain started again outside his window, and Marcus watched the drops race down the glass, wondering which one of them, him or his mother, was the villain in this story. Or if maybe they both were. The next few weeks at Ashford Enterprises fell into a routine that felt surreal in its normalcy. Marcus arrived at 8 a.m. sharp every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, working 6-hour shifts that he'd carefully scheduled around his classes. He told Victoria he was taking evening courses to accommodate the internship, another lie in a growing pile of deceptions. Victoria proved to be an excellent mentor. She taught him the ins and outs of real estate development, from reading architectural plans to understanding zoning laws. She introduced him to clients and colleagues, praising his quick mind and strong work ethic. More than once, she mentioned how impressed she was with his integrity. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. But working closely with her also meant seeing sides of Victoria that complicated his plans for revenge. Like the way she stayed late every Tuesday to video call with a women's shelter, donating not just money but time and advice to women escaping domestic violence. Or how she kept a photo of her 2 children on her desk but would sometimes stare at it with inexplicable sadness, as if she were missing a piece she couldn't name. "Do you have any siblings?" Victoria asked him one afternoon as they reviewed contracts. The question caught Marcus off guard.
"No.
I'm an only child."
"Me too," she said softly.
"It's lonely sometimes, isn't it? Not having that connection." "You have 2 children though," Marcus pointed out, carefully keeping his voice neutral. "Sophia and Ethan, right?
You mentioned them."
Victoria's face brightened, but there was still that shadow behind her eyes. "Yes. They're my world. But sometimes I wonder if I should have had more. If I should have." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Sorry, I'm being maudlin. Must be the weather." It was raining again. It seemed to rain every time Marcus and Victoria had these almost meaningful conversations, as if the universe was trying to tell them something. "What about your parents?"
Victoria asked.
"Are they supportive of your education?"
Marcus's throat tightened.
This was dangerous territory. "My mother died when I was young," he lied, the words tasting like poison. "I never knew my father." The color drained from Victoria's face. Her hand, holding a pen, began to shake so violently that she dropped it.
Excuse me."
She fled to her private bathroom, and Marcus heard the unmistakable sound of someone being sick. When she emerged 15 minutes later, her face was pale, her eyes haunted. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible.
I lost my son. A long time ago."
"He would have been about your age now. Sometimes the reminders they overwhelm me."
This was it. His chance.
Marcus could end the charade right now, tell her the truth, reunite them. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'm sorry for your loss. That must be incredibly painful." Victoria laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You have no idea. I spent years believing he was dead, taken by his father. Eventually, I had to accept it and try to move on. But you never really move on from losing a child, Marcus. You just learn to carry the grief." "But you have Sophia and Ethan," Marcus said, unable to keep the edge from his voice.
Don't they help?
I love them more than life itself, Victoria said fiercely. But they don't replace Marcus. Nothing replaces your first child. Nothing fills that hole.
She wiped her eyes. God, I'm sorry.
This is completely unprofessional. You must think I'm
human, Marcus interrupted.
I think you're human. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon, but something had shifted between them. Victoria seemed to see him differently now, as if his lie about losing his mother had created a bond of shared grief. Marcus hated himself for using her pain against her, but he couldn't stop.
Not yet.